Invisible among stars, the chandeliers in the Metropolitan Museum's Grand Hall cast golden light across the room, transforming even the simplest glass of water into something that sparkled with importance. Nora Winters adjusted her serving tray, careful not to wrinkle the crisp white uniform the catering company had provided for the evening's literary fundraiser. All around her, New York's elite mingled between exhibits of rare manuscripts and first editions, their conversations drifting through the air like expensive perfume. "I swear if one more person snaps their fingers at me, I might accidentally spill something on their designer outfit," whispered Jasmine, Nora's fellow server and roommate, as she passed by with a tray of champagne flutes. Nora smiled, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Just 3 more hours and we can go home to our exciting evening of ramen and reality TV." Unlike many who work these events to network or catch glimpses of celebrities, Nora was genuinely fascinated by the rare books on display. Between serving canapes, she'd stolen glances at the glass-encased manuscripts, her fingers itching to turn their pages. Her English literature degree might be gathering dust while she juggled 3 jobs to pay rent, but her love for stories remained undiminished. "Don't look now," Jasmine murmured, but Dominic Rivera just walked in. Nora couldn't help but look. Everyone knew Dominic Rivera, the tech entrepreneur whose digital publishing platform had revolutionized independent authors' ability to reach readers. At 34, he'd made Fortune's 40 Under 40 list 3 years running. What the magazines didn't capture was how his presence immediately commanded attention, not through loudness but through a quiet intensity that made the space around him seem charged. "I heard he's looking to fund a new literary scholarship tonight," Jasmine continued. "Can you imagine having that kind of money? To just casually drop $1 million on something because you feel like it?" Nora adjusted the small stack of poetry books being given as party favors on her table. "I'd be happy just to afford next semester's tuition for my master's program without taking another loan." As the evening progressed, Nora found herself stationed near an exhibit of modernist poetry, offering guests small glasses of port to accompany the chocolate truffles on her tray. She couldn't help overhearing conversations, publishers discussing market trends, authors debating the merits of different prose styles, and socialites who seemed more interested in being seen than seeing the exhibits. "Which poem is your favorite?" asked a deep voice beside her. Nora turned, the practiced server smile already forming on her lips, only to find Dominic Rivera standing there, his attention not on the champagne or canapes, but on the poetry collection she'd been sneaking glances at between guests. "Oh, I'm not supposed to," she stammered, caught off guard. "Just between us," he said, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "I promise not to report you for having literary opinions while on duty." Something about his genuine interest made her relax slightly. "T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock," she admitted, though that's probably terribly cliché to say at an event like this. Instead of the dismissive nod she expected, his expression brightened. "Not at all. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons," he quoted. "Sometimes the classics become classics for good reason." Before she could respond, a group of investors approached, clearly intent on speaking with him. He gave her a small nod before being swept away. "Did I just see you talking to Dominic Rivera?" Jasmine appeared at her side, eyes wide. Nora shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "He asked about poetry, probably just being polite. Well, while you were discussing literature with New York's most eligible bachelor, I overheard Veronica Ashford, the supermodel turned publishing executive, saying she's determined to leave with his number tonight." Across the room, Nora spotted the statuesque blonde in question, her hand resting casually on Dominic's arm as she laughed at something he said. Next to Veronica's elegant sophistication, Nora felt even more invisible in her catering uniform. "Men like him would never actually notice a girl like me," Nora said with a small laugh. That was just being nice to the help. What she didn't realize was that Dominic, despite nodding at whatever Veronica was saying, had glanced back in her direction, catching her words as they floated across the quieting room. For a moment, something unreadable crossed his features, before he turned his attention back to his conversation. As the evening wound down, Nora was gathering abandoned glasses when she felt someone approach her table again. I noticed you admiring the first editions earlier, Dominic said, holding out a small book. This is being given to major donors, but I thought you might appreciate it more than most people here tonight. It was a limited edition collection of modernist poetry bound in soft leather. I couldn't possibly, Nora began. Actually, he said with a quiet intensity that made her pause, you're the only person I've wanted to give this to all night. Pages of possibility. The morning after the fundraiser, Nora's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. Her shift at Inkwell Cafe started at 6, and her boss, Martin, had zero tolerance for tardiness. As she hurried through her tiny apartment, she paused at her nightstand where the leather-bound poetry book sat. Had she dreamed that interaction? The memory of Dominic Rivera's intense gaze made her cheeks warm. You're humming, Jasmine observed blearily from their kitchenette. Nobody hums before coffee. What's up with you? Nora slid the book into her bag. Just a good night's sleep, I guess. Inkwell Cafe was tucked between a vintage bookstore and a record shop in Brooklyn, drawing a loyal clientele of writers, students, and neighborhood regulars. The cafe's walls were lined with bookshelves, and customers were encouraged to take or leave books as they pleased. It was what had drawn Nora to work there. That, and the flexible schedule that accommodated her sporadic graduate classes. Morning, sunshine, called Pete, the 60-something baker who arrived at 4 each morning to prepare the cafe's famous pastries. You're looking particularly bright-eyed today. Nora tied her apron and began the opening routine. Just excited about this book I got last night, she said, keeping her voice casual as she pulled it from her bag to show him. Pete whistled low. That's not just any book. That's a Weatherby Press limited edition. Only about 100 of those exist. A flutter of unease went through her. She hadn't realized the book was quite so valuable. It made the gesture seem even more confusing. The morning rush kept her too busy for further contemplation. She moved between the espresso machine and counter with practiced efficiency, greeting regulars by name and remembering their usual orders. This was her element, unpretentious, warm, genuine. Here, nobody cared about designer labels or social status. They just wanted good coffee and conversation. The usual for table 7, called Remy, the other barista on shift. Nora glanced over and nearly dropped the mug she was holding. Sitting at table 7, laptop open but seemingly forgotten, was Dominic Rivera. He wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to last night's tailored suit, but there was no mistaking him. When their eyes met, he offered a small smile that sent an unexpected ripple through her composure. Nora? The Americano? Remy prompted. Right, sorry. She prepared the drink, her mind racing. Was this a coincidence? Inkwell was hardly on the radar of Manhattan's elite. The cafe was a 20-minute subway ride from the financial district. When she brought his coffee, Dominic closed his laptop. I was hoping I'd find you here, he said without preamble. You were looking for me? Nora set down his drink, conscious of Remy watching curiously from behind the counter. I realized I never got your name last night. Nora Winters. She shifted awkwardly. How did you know I worked here? The catering company was less than helpful about their staff's information. Rightfully so, he added with a slight smile. But you mentioned measuring life in coffee spoons, and there was an Inkwell Cafe logo on the notebook peeking out of your bag. She wasn't sure whether to be impressed or unnerved by his attention to detail. That's quite observant. I notice what interests me, he said simply. I also realized I ambushed you last night. You were working and I put you in an awkward position. I'd like to apologize properly, maybe over dinner? Nora blinked, certain she'd misheard. Dinner? With me? Unless you're not interested, he added quickly. In which case I'll enjoy my coffee and stop bothering you. A couple entered the cafe, setting the bell above the door jingling. I need to get back to work, she said. Of course. He slid a business card across the table. My personal number. If you decide you're willing to have dinner with a stranger who interrupts your work and tracks down your cafe, I'd love to hear from you. Throughout her shift, Nora kept glancing at table 7, where Dominic remained for nearly 3 hours, alternating between typing on his laptop and making phone calls. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and he'd offer that same small smile that somehow made the busy cafe seem to momentarily pause. Okay, what's the story? Remy cornered her in the supply closet. That guy hasn't taken his eyes off you all morning, and he's definitely not our usual customer type. We met at a catering gig last night, it's nothing. Remy rolled his eyes. Yeah, nothing is why he's been nursing the same coffee for 3 hours. When her shift ended at 2, Nora hung up her apron and gathered her things, unsure whether to acknowledge Dominic on her way out. The decision was made for her when he stood as she approached the door. Would it be too forward to walk you home? He asked. Yes, she said, then felt a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. But you could walk me to the park. I usually read there before my evening class. They strolled through the autumn streets, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. At first, conversation was awkward. Stilted questions about the weather and neighborhood. But when they passed a street musician playing violin, Dominic mentioned his failed childhood music lessons, and suddenly, they were exchanging stories about childhood embarrassments. So there I was, Nora said, laughing. 11 years old, playing Juliet in the school play with toilet paper stuck to my costume for the entire death scene. His laugh was unexpectedly rich. Still better than my piano recital where I froze completely, played chopsticks instead of Mozart, and then ran off stage. At the park, they found a bench overlooking a small pond. Nora pulled out her battered copy of Virginia Woolf for her literature class. What do you see in me? She asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could reconsider it. I mean, at the fundraiser, there were literal supermodels and publishing executives. I'm just an ordinary barista struggling through grad school. Dominic was quiet for a moment, watching a pair of ducks glide across the water. When I was building my company, he finally said, everyone wanted something from me. Investment, connections, publicity. Last night, watching you when you thought no one was looking, the way your face lit up looking at those books. You weren't performing for anyone. That kind of genuine passion is rare in my world. He shrugged. I guess I wanted to know the person who could get lost in poetry while surrounded by New York's most influential people. The autumn sunlight caught in his dark hair, and Nora found herself noticing details she'd missed before. A small scar above his eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. I should get to class, she said softly, though she made no move to leave. Have dinner with me tomorrow, he said. Not because I'm Dominic Rivera or whatever the business magazines call me. Just because I'd like to know more about the barista who quotes T.S. Eliot and reads Virginia Woolf in the park. As the afternoon light turned golden around them, Nora found herself nodding, stepping onto a page of possibility she hadn't imagined existed for someone like her. Margin notes: over the next few weeks, Nora's life took on a dreamlike quality. By day, she still served coffee at Inkwell, attended her literature classes, and worried about rent. But her evenings began to fill with experiences that seemed borrowed from someone else's story. Dominic didn't try to impress her with extravagance. Instead, their third date had been to a tiny Ethiopian restaurant where they'd eaten with their hands and talked until closing. Their fifth date was a surprise visit to a rare book auction where he'd outbid a collector for a first edition Jane Austen that now sat in a temperature-controlled display case in her apartment. Just a loan, he'd insisted when she'd protested the gift's value. Tonight they sat on the small fire escape outside Nora's apartment, sharing takeout curry and watching the Brooklyn sunset paint the sky in watercolors. My investors think I've lost my mind, Dominic said, breaking a comfortable silence. Apparently I've missed 3 essential networking events this month. Nora stirred her rice absently. Do they know you've been slumming it with a barista? Instead, she'd meant it as a joke, but Dominic set down his food, his expression serious. Is that what you think we're doing? That you're some kind of temporary distraction? The question hung in the cool October air. Truthfully, the thought had plagued her more with each passing day. Their worlds were separated by more than just income brackets. They were different planets entirely. I don't know what we're doing, she admitted. You belong in penthouses and boardrooms. I belong in coffee shops and classrooms. Eventually, the novelty of this will wear off. Inside the apartment, Nora's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She crawled back through the window to answer it, grateful for the momentary escape from Dominic's intent gaze. Nora? It's Rebecca, Franklin from Pinnacle Publishing. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. I'm calling about your application for our editorial assistant position. Nora's heart jumped. She'd applied months ago and had given up hope of hearing back. Yes, of course. We'd like you to come in for an interview next Tuesday. Your writing sample was quite impressive. After arranging the details, Nora hung up, momentarily forgetting the uncomfortable conversation waiting on the fire escape. Wendas. She climbed back out, her excitement bubbled over. Pinnacle Publishing wants to interview me. It's an entry-level position, but it's a foot in the door. Do you know how many people apply for these spots? Hundreds. Dominic's face brightened. That's fantastic. You'd be perfect for publishing. I need to update my resume and prepare answers and figure out what to wear and... She stopped suddenly, a cold realization washing over her. Wait, did you have anything to do with this? His smile faltered. What do you mean? Did you call someone? Put in a word? Use your connections? Each question came out sharper than the last. Nora. Because, if you did, I don't want it. I need to earn things on my own merit. Dominic ran a hand through his hair. I would never interfere like that without discussing it with you first. I know how important your independence is. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but found only sincerity. I'm sorry, she said finally. It's just, people have been saying things. What people? Nora sighed, settling back against the railing. Jasmine thinks you're going through some kind of common people phase. Remy keeps joking about pretty woman scenarios. Even Pete asked if you were researching characters for some tech mogul memoir. Understanding dawned in Dominic's eyes. And you've been wondering the same thing. Can you blame me? Last month, my biggest concern was making rent. Now I'm dating someone whose net worth has 9 figures. It doesn't feel real. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. My father was a janitor at a community college. He finally said, my mother cleaned houses. Everything I have, I built from nothing. The difference between us isn't who we are. It's just timing and circumstance. He reached for her hand. What feels real to me is watching you get excited about 19th century literature, how you remember every regular's coffee order and the stories behind them, the way you see beauty in ordinary moments. A lump formed in Nora's throat. I'm scared, she admitted. Not just of getting hurt, but of changing, of becoming someone who expects luxury or loses sight of what matters. Then we'll keep each other honest, he said simply. You remind me that success isn't measured in acquisitions. I'll remind you that dreaming bigger doesn't mean betraying who you are. Later that week, Nora met Dominic's business partner, Harrison Wells, for the first time at a restaurant where the menu had no prices. Always a bad sign for Nora's comfort level. So, Harrison said after preliminary pleasantries, Dominic tells me you're in publishing. Studying it, Nora corrected. I'm getting my master's in English with a focus on publishing and editing. Harrison nodded, clearly assessing her. Interesting timing, with our company's new direction. Dominic shot him, a warning look that didn't escape Nora's notice. What new direction, she asked. We're considering acquiring Greenfield Publishing, Harrison said, ignoring Dominic's obvious discomfort. Small but respected literary publisher. Excellent backlist, terrible financial management, classic acquisition target. The name hit Nora like a physical blow. Greenfield, as in Jonathan Greenfield's company? Harrison raised an eyebrow. You know it? Jonathan Greenfield is my father. The words felt strange on her tongue. She hadn't called him that in years. We don't speak anymore. The table fell into uncomfortable silence. Dominic looked genuinely shocked. You never mentioned your father was in publishing? Because he hasn't been my father since I was 12, Nora said tightly. He left my mother for his 25-year-old assistant editor and started a new family. The publishing company was his dream, not mine. Harrison, sensing the tension, excused himself to take a convenient phone call. I had no idea, Dominic said once they were alone. Your last name? I took my mother's maiden name after the divorce. Nora's mind was racing. How long have you been considering this acquisition? About 3 months. The deal's not public, yet the timeline hung between them like a guillotine blade. 3 months ago, before the fundraiser, before he'd approached her. That's why you noticed me, she said, the pieces falling into terrible place. You recognized my face from your research on my father's company. What? No. Was this whole relationship just a way to get inside information? To find out if there were family issues that might complicate your takeover? Her voice had risen enough to draw glances from nearby tables. Nora, that's not. I need to go. She stood abruptly, grabbing her coat. Don't follow me, don't call, I need to think. Outside in the cool night air, Nora blinked back tears. All around her, the city continued its relentless pace, taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying past, lights blinking in endless windows. She'd been a fool to think she could bridge such different worlds without getting burned. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. It's not what you think. Please let me explain. She turned off her phone and began the long walk home, past glittering storefronts and restaurants where other couples sat, unaware that worlds could collapse in the space between heartbeats. Torn chapters. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, matching Nora's mood perfectly. She moved through her shifts at Inkwell Cafe mechanically, forcing smiles for customers while her mind replayed her last conversation with Dominic on endless loop. You look like hell, Pete said bluntly, sliding a fresh cinnamon roll onto a plate and pushing it toward her during her break. Eat something. Then tell me why you've been walking around like a zombie all week. Nora picked at the pastry. Have you ever felt like you were reading one story, only to discover you were actually in a completely different book? Pete wiped his flour-covered hands on his apron. The rich boyfriend. He did something stupid, didn't he? He's not my boyfriend, she corrected automatically. And yes, or maybe no. I don't know anymore. After leaving the restaurant, she'd ignored 17 texts and 12 calls from Dominic. When a courier had arrived with a letter explaining his side of things, she'd returned it unopened. Pride and hurt had formed an impenetrable wall around her heart. My father's publishing company is failing, she told Pete. Apparently, Dominic's tech firm is planning to acquire it. He never mentioned this connection even after weeks of dating. Did you ever mention your father runs a publishing company? Pete asked reasonably. That's different. My father is a painful subject, and maybe business acquisitions aren't appropriate early dating conversation, Pete countered. Not defending the guy, but there could be innocent explanations. Nora's phone vibrated with an incoming call. Her mother. She stepped outside to answer, grateful for the distraction. Nora, have you spoken to your father? Her mother's voice sounded strained. You know I haven't. Why? He called me looking for you. Something about his company being acquired. He seemed to think you might have influence with the buyer. The bitterness in her mother's tone was evident even through the phone. Jonathan Greenfield had rarely reached out about Nora in the decades since the divorce. I don't, Nora said firmly. And I don't want any part of his business problems. After hanging up, she leaned against the brick wall of the cafe, letting the gentle rain dampen her hair. Her father had abandoned them, started a new family, and now wanted to use her as a lifeline for his failing company. The audacity was breathtaking. That evening, Nora sat in her graduate seminar on publishing ethics, struggling to focus as professor. Lancaster discussed conflicts of interest in the industry. The publishing world is remarkably small, Lancaster was saying. Personal relationships often intersect with business decisions. The question becomes, how do we navigate these overlapping circles with integrity? Nora's phone lit up with a text from an unfamiliar number. This is Jonathan. I need to speak with you urgently about Rivera Digital's acquisition offer. Please call me. She turned her phone face down, anger burning in her chest. After 15 Years of minimal contact, her father thought he could demand her attention for business purposes. When class ended, she was surprised to find Jasmine waiting in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Don't be mad," Jasmine said quickly, "but Dominic Rivera came to our apartment looking for you. I might have let him in to wait." "You what?" Nora stopped walking. "Jasmine, you know I don't want to see him." "I know, but—" Jasmine hesitated. "He explained some things. I think you should hear him out." "So now you're on his side?" "Last week, you were convinced he was using me as some kind of charity case. I was wrong, okay? Just go home and listen to what he has to say. If you still want to kick him out after 5 minutes, I'll help you do it." When Nora arrived at their apartment, she found Dominic sitting on their worn couch, looking out of place in his tailored clothes among their thrift store furnishings. He stood immediately when she entered. "5 minutes," she said, dropping her bag and remaining standing. "That's all you get." Dominic nodded, accepting her terms. "I didn't know Jonathan Greenfield was your father when we met. I didn't even make the connection when we started dating because of your different last name. Harrison only told me about the potential acquisition after our 3rd date. And you didn't think to mention it then?" "I was going to. But that same night you mentioned a father who'd abandoned you for a younger woman. I realized it had to be the same person, and I knew the acquisition would dredge up painful memories for you." Nora crossed her arms. "So you just decided to keep it a secret?" "I recused myself from the acquisition team the next day," Dominic said, his voice steady. "I told the board I had a personal conflict of interest. The paperwork is dated. You can verify this. I was trying to find the right time to tell you, but then Harrison brought it up at dinner before I could." "Convenient timing," Nora said, though her certainty was wavering. "Your father called me yesterday," Dominic continued. "Apparently he heard through industry gossip that we were dating. He suggested that if I wanted to stay in your good graces, I should offer him a more favorable deal." This caught Nora off guard. "He tried to use me as leverage?" He implied that hurting his company would damage any chance of reconciliation between you two. Dominic's jaw tightened. "I told him that weaponizing his relationship with his daughter was despicable, and that my personal life and business decisions were separate matters." Nora sank onto the couch, her anger deflating slightly. It sounded exactly like something her father would do. Manipulative, self-serving, without consideration for her feelings. "Why would you walk away from a good business deal because of me?" she asked, genuinely confused. "We'd only been on a few dates when you recused yourself." Dominic sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. "Because I already knew I wanted more than a few dates. I couldn't risk building something meaningful with you on a foundation of secrets and conflicts of interest." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. "I should have given you a chance to explain," she admitted quietly. "You had every right to be upset. From your perspective, it looked terrible." A heavy silence fell between them, filled with the sound of rain against the windows. "Where does this leave us?" Nora finally asked. "That depends on you. But I want you to know that yesterday, I formally recommended that Rivera Digital walk away from the Greenfield acquisition entirely." Nora's head snapped up. "You did what? Why?" "Partly to remove any doubt about my intentions with you. Partly because your father's business practices don't align with our company values." He hesitated. "And partly because I've realized some things are more important than business opportunities. That decision could cost your company millions. There are other publishers, other opportunities, but there's only one you." The simplicity of his statement hit her with unexpected force. In her world of literature and stories, she'd always been drawn to complex narratives with layered meanings. Yet here was a truth so straightforward it took her breath away. "I need time," she said honestly. "This is a lot to process." Dominic nodded, standing to leave. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. If you decide that's never, I'll respect that too." As he reached the door, Nora called after him. "For what it's worth, I missed you this week." A small smile touched his lips. "I missed you too. More than I thought possible." After he left, Nora sat in the quiet apartment, listening to the rhythm of the rain. She pulled out the leather-bound poetry book he'd given her that first night, the night that now felt like the beginning of a story she hadn't finished reading yet. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from her father. Without opening it, she blocked his number. Whatever relationship they might someday rebuild would have to be on her terms, not his. Instead, she opened her laptop and typed a message to Dominic. "I still have questions. Meet me at Inkwell tomorrow at closing time." His reply came almost immediately. "I'll be there." Outside, the rain finally began to ease, revealing patches of starlit sky between the clouds. Rewritten endings. Nora wiped down the last table at Inkwell Cafe as the evening shadows lengthened. Pete had already left, for the day, giving her a knowing wink and the keys to lock up. Outside, the first snowfall of the season dusted Brooklyn in a fine white powder, transforming the ordinary street into something magical. The bell above the door chimed precisely at 8 o'clock. Dominic entered, bringing with him a swirl of snowflakes and the scent of winter air. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the empty cafe, the silence saying more than words could. "I made us tea," Nora said finally, gesturing to the corner table where 2 steaming mugs waited. They settled into the worn chairs, the cafe's soft lighting casting a warm glow around them. Through the window, they could see pedestrians hurrying past, collars turned up against the snow. "I've been thinking about stories," Nora began, wrapping her hands around her mug. "How they shape us. The ones we tell ourselves, the ones others tell about us." Dominic waited, giving her space to continue. "When we met, I had a very clear story in my head about who I was and what was possible for me." She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "Ordinary girl, ordinary life. No fairy tales, no unexpected plot twists." "And now?" he asked quietly. "Now I'm wondering if I've been reading from the wrong script all along." She met his eyes. "The board approved your recommendation to walk away from my father's company." Dominic nodded. "It wasn't as difficult as I expected. Once our financial team looked deeper into Greenfield's accounts, they found several red flags. Your father's company is in worse shape than we initially thought." "He called my mother again," Nora said. "Apparently, he's been hiding the extent of his financial troubles from everyone, including his new family. He's desperate." "I'm sorry. Family complications are never easy." Nora took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. "I realized something this week. I've spent years defining myself in opposition to my father. His abandonment, his selfishness. I chose literature instead of business. I valued authenticity because he was so false." She gave a small, sad smile. "Even when he wasn't present, he was shaping my choices." "And that bothers you?" "It bothers me that I almost let my issues with him destroy something good with you." She reached across the table, hesitantly placing her hand over his. "I was so afraid of being used or manipulated that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Outside, the snowfall intensified, cocooning the cafe in a soft white silence. The world beyond the windows seemed to recede, leaving just this moment, this conversation, suspended in time. "I've been doing some thinking too," Dominic said, turning his hand to interlace his fingers with hers. "About what I want my story to be." He pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. It was open to an article announcing a new literacy foundation funded by Rivera Digital, a $10 million initiative to bring libraries and literary resources to underserved communities. "You did this?" Nora asked, scanning the details. "The meeting you interrupted that first day at the fundraiser. I was discussing potential philanthropic directions with my team. Meeting you, seeing your passion for literature and accessibility, it clarified things for me." Nora felt a lump forming in her throat. "So I did influence your business decisions." "You influenced me," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. Before you, success meant acquisition, expansion, market share. You reminded me why I started my company in the first place, to connect people with stories that matter." She thought of the journey they'd taken over these past months, From the glittering museum fundraiser to this quiet cafe corner, from strangers to something deeper than she'd ever experienced. "I have a confession," she said. "I got the job at Pinnacle, publishing." His face lit up. "Nora, that's wonderful. When do you start?" "January. I'll keep working here part-time during the transition." She hesitated. "There's something else. I've decided to reach out to my father, not to rescue him financially or forgive the past, but to have an honest conversation as adults." "That's brave." "It's necessary," she countered. "I can't keep letting his shadow hang over my future. Whatever relationship we build, or don't build, needs to be based on truth, not expectations or resentment." The same could be said for what was growing between her and Dominic, she realized. Whatever they became to each other, it would be their choice, their story to write together. "So," Dominic said after a moment, "where do we go from here?" Nora smiled, feeling the last of her walls dissolving. "I was thinking we could start by you helping me pick out a professional wardrobe for my new job, one that doesn't smell like coffee beans." "I happen to like how you smell," he said, leaning closer. "And then," she continued, her voice softer, "maybe we could talk about why you've been looking at real estate listings in my neighborhood." He looked surprised. "How did you—" "Jasmine saw the browser tabs on your laptop when you were waiting." "At our apartment." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Planning to become a Brooklyn resident?" "I was exploring options," he admitted. "My penthouse feels empty lately, too far from certain bookish baristas I've grown fond of. Moving to Brooklyn is a serious downgrade for someone like you, or a serious upgrade, depending on your metrics for success." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've had the penthouse. Phew. I'm more interested in a different perspective now." Outside, a street lamp flickered on, its light refracting through the falling snow in 1,000 tiny prisms. Nora thought about the improbability of their meeting, the series of chances and choices that had led them to this moment. "There's something I never told you," she said. "That night at the museum, when you first approached me about the poetry, I'd been watching you too. Not because you were Dominic Rivera, tech entrepreneur, but because you were the only person there who seemed to be actually reading the exhibits instead of just posing next to them for social media." A slow smile spread across his face. "So you noticed me first?" "I noticed someone who looked out of place in the best possible way," she clarified. "Just like I felt." "Maybe that's what drew us together," he suggested. "Two people reading between the lines while everyone else was skimming the surface." She leaned forward, close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "I think I'd like to kiss you now," she whispered. "If that fits into this new story we're writing." "I believe that's exactly what the next chapter calls for," he murmured, closing the distance between them. As their lips met, Nora felt the last pieces of doubt fall away. This wasn't a fairy tale where a wealthy prince rescued an ordinary girl from obscurity. It was something richer, more complex. Two people recognizing themselves in each other, choosing to build something authentic in a world that often valued appearance over substance. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the snowy streets, Nora thought about the countless ways a story could unfold. How a chance meeting, a moment of genuine connection, could alter the narrative entirely. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary moments," she replied. A comment overheard at a party, a shared appreciation for poetry, a cup of coffee. He smiled, pulling her closer against the cold. "And sometimes," he added, "the real story isn't about being chosen by someone else. It's about choosing each other, every day, one page at a time." Above them, the night sky cleared, revealing stars like punctuation marks in the vast darkness. Periods ending old chapters, ellipses suggesting continuation, question marks promising mysteries yet to be solved. Together, they walked toward whatever came next, authors of their own improbable, wonderful story. One no longer defined by who they had been or what others expected, but by what they chose to become together.